Please review the agenda noting the action item for the day.
So this is a meeting that we call primarily in the event there was any kind of emergency polling place change. We came close to having one last week, but we dodged that problem. And then to for the board to consider the standard authorization on making emergency decisions here on out. This is the standard that we followed for years.
All right, thank you. With that, it's time for public comment. I think everybody here is familiar.
We have Joy Schwartz.
Good morning, Board of Elections. Joy Schwartz from Upper Darby Township. On April 11th at the Board of Elections meeting, there was a petition presented by 24 people, I believe, from Parkside asking for a relocation of the polling place from the Parkside Firehouse to the elementary school, stating that publicly owned locations rather than privately owned ones like the firehouse should be prioritized as polling locations. The request was amplified by some pretty inflammatory accusations of perhaps racial or political intimidation. And it was Jackie Dunn who spoke to this, including a claim that African Americans were being doused with a fire hose and that a bench was deliberately moved to perhaps disadvantage vulnerable minorities. Mr. Alberts, who was, I don't believe, was present at the Parkside Firehouse, chimed in with a very interesting innuendo that poll workers were maybe drinking some kind of alcoholic beverages out of paper cups and perhaps getting drunk. The board then voted 2-1 to change the polling place despite no proof of the accusations and despite concerns that the elementary school might not be workable. After the last Board of Elections meeting, I received a message from a constable who was present at the Parkside Firehouse during the November 5th election. This is what he said. Thank you for attending the meeting of the Parkside voting location. I watched the video meeting of the Board of Elections meeting, and there were so many lies being told. The fire truck was not washed that day. No Black people were sprayed. The bench was moved because it was impeding a door. And then he refers to Mr. Alberts as the guy on the board with the handlebar mustache was not truthful. He said people were drinking out of cups, but didn't know what they were drinking. Well, they were sharing Wawa iced tea. He certainly implied that it was something else, but it was not. Board of Elections, if there were civil rights violations, the accusers need to file a lawsuit and let their evidence be heard in court. I'm sure the nonpartisan League of Women Voters would be happy to assist in that. These Board of Elections meetings are not judicial hearings where this board would be judge and jury over such a situation. Mr. Albert should not be making a case for the accusers. The Parkside poll workers deserve a reversal and an apology from the 2 Democrats on this board. And don't even get me started on the politically charged precedent that you have set with the relocation of this precinct by caving in to what seems like frivolous snowflake meltdowns. I have 2 questions for you. Mr. Alberts and Ms. Lunkenheimer, what if somebody were to ask you if there was something in your coffee this morning that would, or that morning, that would have led you to that decision? That's all I have to say. Thank you.
I mean, we've made a lot of comments about the vote. If you want to say anything, you're welcome to.
Just want to clarify that I said nothing about the poll workers when I described the situation that occurred outside the polling place. And I'll just leave it at that.
Other public comment?
I'm Laura Lewis, Radnor Township. I'm here, as I always am, to address election machine vulnerabilities. Specifically, I would like to address how cryptomatic risks undermine electronic voting systems. Scytegrity, developed by Ronald Rivest at MIT, uses cryptomatic techniques to allow voters to verify their votes without revealing their choices. Zero-knowledge proofs enable voters to confirm that their vote was recorded correctly without disclosing the vote itself, and homomorphic encryption allows votes to be tallied without decrypting individual ballots, preserving anonymity. However, these protocols are computationally intensive and rely on the integrity of the underlying software. A Tingshao University paper on privacy-preserving e-voting replicated Integrity's architecture, raising concerns about foreign entities studying and potentially exploiting these systems. The Australian Strategic Policy Institute's report documented over 600 Chinese scientists accessing Western research, suggesting that U.S.-developed voting technologies could be integrated into the PLA People's Liberation Army systems. This indicates a pathway for adversaries to analyze and manipulate cryptomatic frameworks, possibly embedding backdoors or weaknesses into systems used globally. The mixing phase cryptography is particularly vulnerable. This phase shuffles encrypted votes to break the link between voters and their choices. But if the software is compromised, an attacker can manipulate the shuffle to alter outcomes. The opacity of proprietary software exacerbates the risk. Unlike open source systems, proprietary code lacks public scrutiny, making it easier to hide exploits. International knowledge transfers, such as those facilitated by institutions like Harvard and Tingshao, amplify the threat. Real-world observations underscore these risks. A DEF CON Voting Village report showed that voting machines, including those using cryptomatic protocols, could be hacked in minutes due to outdated software and weak encryption. This aligns with broader concerns about cryptographic systems. A bug in Zcash, a cryptocurrency using zero-knowledge proofs, allowed undetectable counterfeiting. In the context of voting, such a flaw could enable an attacker to forge votes or manipulate tallies without detection. I think we should go to paper ballots and hand counting. Thank you very much.
Any additional public comment?
One from Karis Coker.
Good morning, Karis Coker, Concord Township. I want to state I really appreciate the knowledge, the skill, the insights, the details of Laura's research and reports. I wish this board would take advantage of her abilities and knowledge. I want to address the matter of oaths for all persons involved in the election, from the employees in every office to all of the temp workers who work down at the wharf or picking up ballots anywhere. That oath needs to be one of allegiance, not merely to a very loosely worded obey the laws or to honestly report my time. It needs to be an oath of allegiance to the United States. And speaking of that, I have personally objected publicly and will continue to do so, and also here, to Mr. Scott Alberts serving on the Board of Elections when he, by his alliances with the Democratic Socialists of America and their publicly stated platforms and his own comments, is entirely opposed to what he did take an oath to, but what does it mean to him in view of his positions that he holds ideologically, philosophically, and so forth. And I strongly object and hope the day soon comes when he is no longer serving on this board. And I was sorry that you weren't here because I didn't want to say that behind your back. So I'm glad you arrived. Item number 6 on the agenda. It is a great concern that this board would abdicate its responsibilities and place all of these very significant decisions in the hands of Mr. James Allen. There are many concerns over the way the elections have been conducted, and for those of us who haven't been inquiring into the avoidance manner and in which he has dealt with some of our concerns. Some of them have been addressed, but it's inconsistent. And we make our appeal to heaven if there is no recourse here. I could not help but think this morning as I was coming of the charges that were made against King George in 1776. And the current government in Delaware County, and including some of the actions of this board, are as unresponsive to the concerns, legitimate concerns, as King George was. Thank you very much.
If I may just address the key points real quickly. I was truly delighted by Ms. Lewis's reference to Ronald Rivest at MIT. I personally consulted with Mr. Rivest because he's one of the foremost developers of the original and most comprehensive cryptographic systems. However, for context, Ronald Rivest has publicly stated, and I can send you the videotape, and I've contacted him more recently to say, do you still believe this? Has spoken very, very emphatically about the need for balloting systems to be paper and pen that can be recounted because there's an indelible record of every single ballot cast. We have been through numerous recounts that have verified every single one of the original counts, going by Mr. Rivest's recommendations. Secondly, on the oaths, we've talked about this a number of times, and the oaths, you found fault with them because you didn't think they said enough about the Pennsylvania Constitution and the U.S. Constitution and obeying the laws, and we've tweaked them to make sure that they're as comprehensive as possible. You're now moving the goalposts again to say that they need to have an allegiance to the United States. I personally think that the oaths that all of our employees, all of our temps are taking are extremely adequate, exceed the requirements under the law. They state that that all of the workers will follow the law, follow the Constitution of Pennsylvania, follow the Constitution of the United States of America, adhere to the election code, and prevent any kind of error or fraud. I don't know what more the allegiance that you're referencing would add to that, because you'd have to be violating one of those four things to be violating allegiance. So I don't know what to say. You've received copies of those. No, this isn't a give and take. You've had your public comment. I'm giving a response. You
Just file a request with.
you filed
election.
requests. We've always made them available. Crystal has them, and you've even praised Crystal for providing you with copies of the oaths in public meetings.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. And I, didn't revisit the Parkside discussion because I thought my comments stand on the record for themselves, but something else stands on the record and will stand for all time, and I think holds up to great integrity, and that is the service of Scott Alberts on this board. It had been a while since he had been personally attacked, and we had gone some time, but it comes around every now and then, perhaps when there's nothing more constructive to say to this board. And I am proud to serve with him. I think that you can review any tape of any of our meetings and see the thoughtful service he provides to this board. And if you review, I don't know all of his life, but the things I know of it, he's given great service to this county. So I'd just like to note that, even though I believe I've had to say that before every time this comes around. So thank you, Mr. Alberts, for your service. Is there any additional public comment?
There were no other requests to make public comment.
All right.
We have, I will be circulating minutes to you soon from various meetings, but we have, because I did not circulate them to the board prior to today, I'm not going to ask you to consider those.
Okay. Well, then we have one action item for the day. I'm so glad that we don't have any poll place changes. I did assume we would always, I don't know if we've ever not had any of them right at this point in time.
Don't speak too soon. We're not just quite yet at the election.
Well, they will now be delegated to the emergency. We will review them
Thank you
afterwards.
to heaven. So
All right, do we have a motion as presented to authorize election director to make decisions on processing mail absentee ballots, make emergency polling place changes, and make other emergency election administration related decisions if necessary for the orderly conduct of the May 20th, 2025 primary?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Just like to note that this is, there's something about the way it was presented today, as if this is something new or different or not absolutely necessary to run the day-to-day operations that are needed to make this election successful. But we've every time I've been on this board since January of 2020, this is something that you do, and it's good administration. But that said, in my experience, all the board members have helped supervise the election as consistent with our duties, and our solicitor is also present. We always have a solicitor present during the into the night, but not through the night necessarily, but available through the night. So,
Well, I will be there or someone from my team will be there all the way until the canvas is completed,
that's
actually.
right.
So it
That's
does
right.
go
That's
through
how
the
we get
night.
into the night, and we might not be that as late in a primary of this sort, but all right. Does anybody, do you have any comment you want to make about the motion?
No, other than, yeah, just to reiterate, this is routine. And furthermore, Director Allen makes a point of keeping us informed of major decisions, and perhaps consulting with individual members if, one of us is a subject matter expert. I feel very confident in his ability to handle the operations, as is the normal practice, as far as I'm aware of. Every county I've ever participated in politics in Pennsylvania makes this sort of delegation.
I do have a question. Mr. Allen, being as this is my first time doing it, it is not old. So. Pardon. As this is not my first time voting on this, please humor me for a second. This gives you the delegated authority for emergency election decisions. Can you give me an example of what type of emergency related decisions we're talking about, the scope of this power?
Certainly. For example, in 2022, right before the November election, we received a rather extremely last minute of order from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court that changed which envelopes we were allowed to consider for processing on election day, and which ones we were not allowed to consider. This required significant changes and pulling in resources, especially when that was the Tuesday before election day. And then we didn't get any explanation in that court ruling as far as what constituted incorrect dates. We received nothing. It just said, you shall not include items with incorrect dates. So during that period, I had to consult with the board and develop what I had to infer what I could from the court's extremely cryptic ruling. And it wasn't just me, it was directors across the Commonwealth. We're like, what in the world does this mean? What is a correct date? What's an incorrect date? And it was, so I developed rules and standards in consultation with the board, but without the benefit of being able to call an emergency board meeting to get to make that call. But nonetheless, I circulated with the board. This is what I plan to do. This is how we plan to read that court ruling, and this is how we plan to treat these envelopes. So, and it wasn't just us, because then later, the Friday before Election Day, the Supreme Court, at the urging of the Department of State and all the counties and everything else, asking, what in the world did you mean by that? Urged the Supreme Court, we need clarification. So they came down with clarification on the Friday before Election Day. We had already sorted through the envelopes, and it turns out my recommendation was more conservative than what the Supreme Court came down with in terms of what it meant. And we had to go back through I forget the number at the time, but the 40,000 envelopes that we'd received, and look for the items that in my inference of the court ruling, we had started to exclude, but after the court issued its clarification, how to allow those envelopes to be processed. So we had to bring in extra staff. I had to recommunicate that with the board that Friday before. There also can be polling place changes. There could be, heaven forbid, a fire, or suddenly we go to deliver the cage and we find it's a giant construction zone. And the polling place owner didn't think about, May 20th coming up. there are all kinds of little things that, they're not cracks in the sidewalk, but tripwires that, you find unexpectedly.
I
on the way.
would say the most common, though, is probably when we have vacancies that are remaining in local election boards 5 days before elections. This board has the statutory authority to make emergency appointments to fill those vacancies, and this delegation delegates to Mr. Allen the authority to take people who are properly trained and sort of on a staffing waiting list, if you will, that our folks in the Bureau office maintain, and get those people appointed out to the positions of biggest need where there are still vacancies and the emergency appointment window is open. So that's, I would say, the biggest thing that happens as part of this. But as Jim notes, many other.
Oh, you're bringing back all sorts of PTSD. What about when like the blueprint, there's a batch of envelopes, the barcode on the outer envelope that could be hand waved. I mean, there's just all sorts of little things.
Right. And I guess the reason I'm asking is, I think we can all understand the fire, the construction zone, the weather as true emergencies. Whether a court decision comes down and has to be interpreted, I'm not really comfortable saying that's an emergency. It's certainly a concerning issue that has to be dealt with. But as long as that is something that is then still shared with the board for consultation, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, and ultimately, that issue can be addressed because the board will meet after the election, if nothing else, for certification. And at that point, if there are differing views about the standards that should be used, they can come up at that point as well. And so there's also a provisional ballot hearing and other
I think
board
that did
meetings.
happen in 2022 when we
it
were
did.
talking about that. Yeah.
It did. So there are other opportunities, but I understand your concern for sure about that particular example.
I just
but-
don't want a unilateral declaration by Mr. Allen that anything is an emergency. I mean, it's a term that we all understand, but an emergency is, and I trust you for that.
Yeah. Although sometimes I do think the courts create false emergencies by delayed ruling. That's what.
That is, yeah.
All right, with that, if there's no further discussion, then all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
None opposed, that motion passes. Thank you. And Mr. Allen, speaking of the orderly running of the elections, do we have a next meeting date?
Yeah, this is one of those elections that falls the Tuesday before Memorial Day weekend, so it's not going to be really easy to go about what we have to do the Friday before starting the return board, possibly Saturday uploading rather the voter history from the poll pads after we get those back from the warehouse, and also having to have the unofficial results, whatever we have in counted at that point by 5 p.m. on the Tuesday after Election Day. Is the Tuesday after the Tuesday immediately following Memorial Day. So that's presents a potential crush of work for our staff, who quite rightly, after weeks of work, months of working on this election, are going to want to be with family. But there it is. And so I'd like the board to be cognizant that if we have to call a meeting for any kind of blanket provisional filing that's made, or for the provisional hearings, to be aware that, we may be asking you to convene the Friday and or Tuesday surrounding Memorial Day. So hopefully not, but definitely the Tuesday after Memorial Day. I'd ask that you please keep your calendars so that you're available at some point that day.
And the other date that would have been the Friday in question is the 23rd, correct?
Friday, the 23rd. There's a possibility that we may have to ask you to meet. So, but we also have to launch return board that morning. So.
That makes sense. I will be in the area during all of that time, so. Not a quorum, but I'm just telling you, Mr. Allen. All right, With that, do we have anything else, Mr. Perks?
Nothing for me. Thanks.
Okay, Mr. Allen?
This
Anybody
time.
anybody else on the board? All right, then is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
All those in favor say aye.